right. So the title, Stay in the King's Court, literally everything that I had gone through over the past couple months. I feel like God gives me these great reminder lessons of how I should be maneuvering life. I am the type of person where I ended up getting very frustrated about dating. And you could be so accomplished in so many other areas. And then all of a sudden, when it comes to dating, that's always the hump for everybody, men and women. I have some of the most, I've got to like clean out my Facebook timeline. I have some of the most toxic men on my timeline who put the issues with dating on women as if they don't have their own issues that are coming out in their postings. But whatever, that's for a different thing. But anyways, so when I get frustrated with something, when I feel like something's not moving at the pace that I want it to, I will try and push it. That's the ambitious part of me. I will do my very best to like push forward, which means that I rush often and I get ahead of God often. It is very, I'm skipping ahead, but around about November, late November, I am dating and I meet somebody who, for all intents and purposes, it looks like they are a great guy. Everyone, it looks like I have found this person that's going to be a part of my life for a long time. I wouldn't say married because I wasn't thinking that he was, but it looks like I have found somebody, right? Um, and it's going well. I am keeping myself up here, keeping myself as elevated as possible. He is every bit the hunter, loves it. We already know how that's going to go when you have somebody who's a hunter. What do they do when they catch their prey? They usually stop hunting, right? So we end up in this very quick whirlwind relationship. Not even, I wouldn't even call it a relationship in all honesty. Um, and everything is going great until, and he's, every other time he's probably a great guy. But when we met, he was going through so much. And the more he went through, the worse he got. The more he shut down, the less we talked. And I found myself almost begging him to talk to me or be a part of my life. And I've never done that before. Like, that's not something that I am used to. So, we're going through this and I know it's wrong. I know it's not right. I know that I know that I shouldn't be begging anybody to give me time or attention. I know this. But in my mind, for some kind of way, I thought, well, maybe I need to support him and undergird him in all of these things. You can support somebody all you want to. You could be their foundation. If they are not ready, they are simply not ready. So I'm trying my best to undergird this person, not realizing that the more I do that, the more I'm allowing him to behave this way and I'm lowering that bar. At this point, I put the bar on the ground. I'm just asking you to reach out to me and talk to me. And in a sense, you've got to begin to also think about who you have around you and the type of people that you have around you. I was asking advice from women who were not as, who were very, very patient, more patient than what I should have been. And so now I've got people around me telling me to be patient, give him grace, wait, and I'm crying my eyes out. And it's almost as if I felt like I was being treated by my friends like, well, if you're crying that much, then just stop. But no one was understanding that like what he was doing was hurting me. And I felt like I was being treated like, you're the problem. Why are you crying so much? Like, don't you see he's going through some things? And I'm saying, but I'm not being treated right. And for that moment, it felt like nobody was on my side. And so I'm thinking, well, maybe this is what I need to just kind of deal with. If you don't have people that will tell you, no, what you're feeling is right, even if you feel it back to back to back to back to back, your spirit knows how it should be treated. So if you don't have somebody telling you, I know this has happened again, but you're still not, your feelings aren't validated, then you're going to have to, I'm going to be the one to tell you, I don't care how many times you've been down this road. I mean, I don't care how many times you felt this. If your spirit once again has said, this isn't right, listen to your spirit. You are not crazy and you're not dramatic and you're not whatever anybody will make you try and feel. Listen to your spirit all the time. I wish I had done that. Eventually I did. but not after a lot of tears, a lot of long text messages, a lot of, oh, please be here. Like, I've put the bar on the ground. And mind you, he knew he had said to me, "Oh, I know how elevated you are. I know I can't play games with you. I have to rise to the occasion." And never did. Nor did I require him to. So when we come out of the king's court and when we lower our position and when we lower our bar, whose fault is it when that person doesn't hit it? I'll speak. It was mine. It was mine. So now that I've come into the awareness of who I am and I'm requiring him to come up and hit this bar, it is very much like, I can't believe it. Oh my gosh, are you serious? You're being impatient because I want you to call back, because I want you to pick up the phone. So, and I don't want to spend too much time, you know, dogging him out, because that is over. He's like not even in my influence anymore. Literally just a lesson that I don't think about anymore. So I don't want to spend too much time there. But I'm just setting the groundwork for you. And then I come back to the awareness of who I am. And then weeks later, there is this person that, how many of y'all have a person that like just has this hold on you? Like, they have this hold on you. They're that one person where, you know, if they call, you're there. You know, if they come up to you, like when they, the best way I can put it to be vulnerable as possible, someone that I have loved more than anybody. Someone that I have loved more than anybody since my ex-husband. He is somebody that has a grip on me, has a hold on me, and he has always known it. Never honored it though. And so I find myself back in this situation where I know that if you touch the water just a little bit with this person, with this man who you have loved for over 7 years, if you touch it just a little bit, you're going to end up hurt. You know this, Shamar. Because my heart is so with this person in such a pure way, I we have to. Yes. He calls, I'm there. And as you can guess, I'm trying not to cry. As you can guess, once again, this person that I have loved for years, this person that I have given myself to, this person that I have loved in a way that I've never loved anybody before, is not here. And I should have known. He has already shown me that he's never going to love me the way that I love him. And he's never going to choose me in the way that I choose him. But I found myself once again coming out of who I know I should be, how I know I should behave. And I'm laying myself at this man's feet, more so than the one I just talked about. That was just blah. But this person has been here for years, in and out, off and on. I've never not loved this person. So here I am, laying myself at their feet, and nothing comes of it. Nothing comes of it again, other than me realizing, Shamar, you love somebody who's never going to love you back. So at that moment, this day of, I'm crying my eyes out. I am all over the place. I am just a mess. That's when I hear, stay in the king's court. That's when I have someone say to me, Shamar, stay in the king's court. And at that time, I began to read about Esther, and I'm reading about the book of Esther. So this person yelling at me, Shamar, stay in the king's court, begins to make a whole lot of sense. So when we talk about staying in the king's court, now that we've laid the groundwork, let's really get into like what staying in the king's court means. All right, so stay in the king's court. Um, we are, if I think about how I was raised very princess like. I was raised in the suburbs, definitely the suburban black girl. I was raised by men who coddled me, who spoiled me, who led their families. This is also why I think I have a hard time with dating, because I don't adhere to this whole if they have good jobs and if they pay bills and if they take good care of you, they're a high value man. To the men that raised me did that without a title. Like, they just did it because they don't consider that being a high value man. They just consider that being a man, being a good person. So my grandfather would say, "You want a cookie for being a good man?" So I was raised by men who, imperfect as we all are, but ultimately at the end of the day, loved their wives, loved their children, and raised their children and provided and led. I was raised by women who were amazing leaders and preachers and poured out and prayed over and led their families, kept the houses clean, showed up at functions, made sure dad got the big piece of chicken, and did all of this without feeling like they were falling under the patriarchy, because they still had their voice. They retained their voice and their spirit. I'm sure they sacrificed, but ultimately they never gave up their autonomy. So I was raised very much well rounded, very much so much so to the point where I used to get called Whitley Gilbert, and sometimes I still do. So I was raised very elevated, but I wasn't raised to be pretentious, and I wasn't raised to be mean. But I was also raised to make sure that all the high standards that I require, I was raised to make sure that I was surpassing them, and I still am surpassing them. So there is a very royal like raising that I remember having. You know, not all roses, nobody's life is, but definitely a very elevated way of, okay, Shamar is going to be a well rounded woman. So now, as somewhere along the way, after being raised with grace, leadership, elegance, class, really brilliance, where have I forgotten that? And I feel like a lot of times when we say stay in the king's court, this is what I have read Esther so many times. Esther has been talked about so many times, but now I have it with a fresh set of eyes. So let's get into staying in the king's court, and we'll spend some time with Esther here. Y'all know I got notes. So let me just pull up my little phone because I got notes. All right. So why would anyone want to leave the king's court in the first place? When we think about the book of Esther, we very much romanticize that book, right? I have too. And to a certain point, there are elements of romanticism within that book. The king loved Esther. But the reality is, when you are coming from the outside into the king's court, spiritually, many of us are, there are certain rules that you have to adhere by. You are pretty much leaving a lifestyle behind and entering into a new one. It's a total lifestyle change. So, because only the best of the best is allowed in the king's court. So as you get behind the king's court, you have to adhere to high standards always set forth. No pressure, but like pressure, right? You're living in the world, but you're not part of the world. So like, yes, you're in the world, but you're not part of the outside systems, protocol, style of dress, language. None of that applies to you anymore, because now you're in the king's court. You are hereby set apart. You are different. You are elevated, which means that it cuts you off from a life that you previously knew. That's not always easy. Which means that there also may be a separation from people that you knew for a few different reasons. Not everyone may be happy to see you in the king's court. Some people as you elevate, you just simply outgrow. None of this makes it easy to be in the king's court. And to be quite honest with you, it doesn't always seem fair to be in the king's court, because once you're in the king's court, these women, they're not allowed to just engage with anybody. All of your intimate engagements, whether they're romantic or platonic, they are ordained for you. They are set aside for you, which means that these people that you intimately interact with are more than likely adhering to the king's court standards as well. Which means that your options, as you could tell, become they minimize a little bit. So being in the king's court doesn't always seem fair, because you have standards that you have to adhere by. You can't do what everybody else is doing. You can't be where everybody else is. You have now elevated, So if you're not careful, it can feel like you're missing out. It can feel like life is beginning to pass you by. But the other reality of the king's court is being inside the king's court for these women, it brings, and I'm paralleling here because we are talking about Esther in the king's court, but I'm also talking about us in the king's court, God's court, right? But being in the king's court, it brings security, confidence, stability, comfort. Yeah, I got my notes. It's bringing provision, guidance. It brings grace, wisdom, lifelong lessons. It brings support. It brings, or it should bring, agape style love. It brings, I've never seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging for bread. It brings very much, I'm written in the palm of God's hand. It brings very much always the head, never the tail. It brings very much always above, never beneath. It brings very much always wins, I'm never defeated, right? So there are so many securities within the king's court, but what makes a person want to leave? What made me want to leave? Now, as I've grown, initially it was the pressure of it. But as I've grown, I've realized that with our king's court, you don't have to be perfect in order to stay in the king's court, right? So that pressure isn't there anymore. But I feel like there is this misunderstanding of the scripture. Once you get strength, go back and strengthen others. And it's that go back part that we stumble upon. And so we're going to use Esther to explain why going back doesn't mean leaving the king's court. So Esther was not just chosen by an earthly king. She was chosen by a godly king. She was chosen to be in this position for a reason. God knew what was coming up. God knew the destruction that lay waste. So Esther was chosen in so many different ways to not only be royalty, but to be a heroine, but to be someone that will rescue her people. She was cut off from the outside world. Now we're at this point where Esther is, and I'm just, for the sake of time, bring it all down here. We are at this point now where Esther is cut off from the outside world. And to speed it all up, there's this man named Haman. He real raggedy or whatever. Here we go. And one of the Jews, Mordecai, doesn't bow to him. So now Haman wants to kill all the Jews. And King Xerxes, I'm sorry, but King Xerxes was just not smart in my opinion. King Xerxes was getting very gullible, very much listened to everybody but his own self. And so he didn't even ask no questions. King Xerxes was like, all right, cool, we're going to kill everybody. But King Xerxes didn't even realize that his own queen was Jewish because she ain't say nothing at the time. Okay? This is for a different topic. But Esther does not know what's about to happen. Why would she though? Because she's cut off from the outside world. So it wasn't until she hears her cousin Mordecai, there's not reports about if he's her cousin or uncle, but it wasn't until she hears her cousin Mordecai outside of the palace. He can't come in because he's not royalty. Outside of the palace, wailing and moaning in sackcloth and ashes, which is extreme mourning. And she does not go out there to see what's going on. She sends messengers to go see what's going on. The messengers go a few times, and finally they bring word back to Queen Esther that the decree has gone forth for her entire nation to be slaughtered. So, point A, okay? Too many of us take off our crowns, and too many of us take off our royal robes, and we leave the king's court and we leave the king's presence thinking that this is what's necessary in order to go find out what's happening elsewhere, and thinking this is the best way to help. And it's not always the best way to help. The situation and the people that you are meant to intercede for will make their way to you. I'm looking at notes. You already know what this is. So if you see me to the side, that's why. You just need to remain watchful and open, but you never have to leave your position and lower yourself to go see what the goings on is. But you do have to remain watchful, open, and prayerful. Esther was in the king's court, but she wasn't naive, and you don't need to be either. Esther still had a heart for her people. She still had her ear listening, and she remained prayerful to what was happening with her people. But she never had to leave her position. As a matter of fact, being in her position is what saved her people. She had to be in that position in order to help. So you get what I'm saying? We leave the king's court in the presence thinking that we have to go help somebody, save somebody, or save the situation. Meanwhile, being in your elevated position is what actually does help and make all the difference. It shifts atmospheres. It changes things. So you help no one by leaving who you've been called to be, to go backwards for any reason, especially not for someone who doesn't even have the audacity, and especially not for someone who has the audacity to not even realize the grace that's in front of them. Okay? So, once Esther found out what's happening, she had some decisions that she had to make. Um, she became afraid, like, what's going to happen to her once she reveals who she truly is. Because up until that point, she hadn't revealed that she's Jewish. Her real name was Hadassah. So, what happens when she reveals who she truly is? What happens if she takes a stand? Is she going to lose her position? Is she going to be put to death? And the beautiful thing about all of that is that, um, and I'm skipping ahead here, but revealing who she was didn't take away from who she was. But instead of just making a hasty decision, Esther calls for a fast for 3 days. 3 days of prayer and fasting to prep for the next step. Point B. Too many of us give way to our emotions, and we hastily leave the king's court. We make these really hasty decisions with no real plans, and then we find ourselves drained, used, feeling walked all over, feeling heartbroken because we ran into a situation that was outside of the king's court, that was outside of God's presence, without thinking. We ran to that person. This is me talking to me now, okay? And the minute they asked, without contemplating, how am I going to end up? So, in a nutshell, during this period of fasting and prayer, she receives her instructions on what to do. Like, calm down. Don't go so fast. I talk fast, but whatever. So, in revealing who she really was to the king, it didn't take away from who she really was. Chosen, favored, grace, loved, because not only did God love her, but that king, ooh, he loved her. Still royal. Okay? So, she eventually reveals who she is, and she reveals the plot to kill her people. And long story short, Haman himself is hanged. So, interestingly, with this story, and I'm like condensing it because we would be here all day. Interestingly, it was from this position of royalty, favor, grace, that she became a heroine. She never had to take off her crown. She never had to take off her royal robe. She never even had to leave the king's court to do so. She advocated from where she was. And not only was she a heroine that saved an entire nation, but because she ended up reminding the king about her cousin Mordecai, who earlier in the story had saved the king's life, she was now able to bring her cousin from the outside in. So from her position of royalty, she was able to bring her cousin up to royalty. So with all of that being said, she saved the nation, raised people up to her level without having to leave her level. Point C is truly self-explanatory. God will never require you to go back to old habits, old ways, old actions, old language, old people. God will never require you to come down from your position in order to go get anybody else. You can do that without leaving your position. You can partner with God. Let God lead you. Let God lead you to love, rescue, pray for, care for, be kind to, shift atmospheres, change lives, change history. You can do that from the position that you've been elevated to. If anything, that's what gives you the backing to do these things. Esther's position of elevation is what gave her that backing to do it. And in this case of Esther and her cousin, it's also what brings people up to you. In the world, but not really of the world. You never have to leave the king's court so when we hear the phrase go back, that doesn't mean go back to old ways, go back to old habits. What it means is don't forget the people who still need to come up. Don't forget the people that you love. When it's time to intercede for them, be ready to intercede for them. Be ready to love them. Be ready to support them. But you can do that without having to remove your own royal garments. And lastly, to all the single women, I will say this. It is very frustrating in my sense. It has proven to be very frustrating to be in the case of I'm working in the ministry. I'm a woman in ministry. I have these incredibly high standards that I have to adhere to. And it makes it, being in the king's court does limit your options some way. So the fear is if my options are limited, I will never find someone that's going to love me. And that fear will cause you to give yourself to someone who will never love you or choose you. Um, the pain from unrequited love it's indescribable. There are days where I feel like I can't breathe. There are days where I feel like I don't want to get up. But girl, you got to get up. You got to get up and you got to get back into the king's court. Because here's what I have learned about this. Not only was Esther chosen by the King of Kings, God Himself, but she was also given an earthly king that loved her so much that he was like, whenever she came to him to ask him something, he was like, what, you want the whole king? You want half the kingdom? Man was willing to give her half his kingdom 3 times. I'll give you half my kingdom. So she ended up with a man that loved her. King Xerxes, he didn't just choose Esther, he loved Esther. And you have to trust that God is not only going to bring you into the king's court, but He's going to bring you someone that is going to love you in that way. And I know it's hard, but you have to trust into that and lean into that, because the alternative is don't give your jewels away to a bootlegger that will not even bother to keep you. Let God bring you someone that's going to love you. My darling, you are formed by God. You are knit together by God. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. You are a chosen generation. You are royal. You are holy. You are special. You have been brought out of darkness into this beautiful light, as I got the light in my face. So what I'm saying to you is, it is worth it, always worth it, to stay in the king's court. You don't ever have to leave and bring yourself backwards for anybody. When you need to intercede, when you need to pray, you will be led to do so without ever having to take off your crown. It is worth it. I have learned the hard way. It is worth it to stay in the king's court, something that I will never come out of again. Have a beautiful week. I hope this has blessed my soul. I go more in depth on it on my blog as well. So go to my website, www.shamarlatanya.com, CHAMARLATANJA.com, and you can read more about it in depth. So I love y'all. I hope this has blessed you. Have a fantastic week and Sunday.